Welcome back. Now I've just dragged a whole bunch of assets from the Ruins folder here and these Paragon props, and now I have a nice selection that I can use to start creating our level here based on this geometry. Now I'm going to do a few things in this video to make our lives a lot easier, because this could be done in a whole lot of different ways. Now, one way would be to just take little bricks and, kind of like a stonemason, just drag in brick by brick and build it up, and the entire thing will be completely non-repeating and original the entire way through, and that would take a long, long time. And that is not what I'm interested in doing at all. I'm interested in creating something that will not necessarily look too repeated, although it will be pretty repeated, but I do want to make things easy so I can just have, big, large pieces that I can copy and reuse. So, for example, this block right here, this is one big square block. And it needs to look like it's made out of stone. And it's not really important what it looks like underneath it because it's a floor stone. And it's okay if I have one big piece that I can copy and reuse, especially if I have 2 or 3 big pieces, so you can't really tell that it's being copied. It's not something you'll really notice. So I'm going to start off with this one square piece and make this piece out of these Ruins assets and see if I can get something that looks decent and something I can copy and reuse for the floor. So what I'm going to do is hold Alt and drag and then hold Shift so I can bring the camera with me and bring over one of these blocks. And I'm going to create this sort of stone block based on this square, and then have something that I can hopefully copy and use for at least part of the level for the floors. Now for this floor, I'm going to need to select which stones to use. Now, I think large stones would be good to use for the floor because, well, there's a lot of floor, and the larger the stone, the less stones you need to use. So here I only have 2 of this type of stone, and I'd like to go ahead and use this stone. So what I'm going to do is take both of these, hold Alt and drag out to copy them and bring them over to my floor here. And I'm going to see if I can create some sort of repeatable pattern that I can use. So I'm going to drag one of them over onto the grid and just kind of see how many squares that it takes up on this grid here. I'm going to bring it over to the edge. If I can, I think I'm going to have to set my scale back down to 100 and maybe even 50 actually, just to bring it over to the edge. And that looks good. So it looks like it's going to take up 5 squares on the edge here. And it looks like the entire thing is 10. So really, if I want to, I can leave it at this size and sort of create a kind of repeating pattern. So I can go ahead and put it all the way up to the top corner of this. And now I can look at this dimension and see how many squares it takes up here. Now I'm going to have to set my snapping down to about 10 in order to put it right up to the edge. And it looks like it's almost 5 small squares. So I'm probably going to want to scale this thing down. Now if I scale it down, I'm going to use snapping while I scale it down. And I'd like to scale it so that it has a set number of squares. So I'm going to go ahead and scale it in all 3 dimensions by 1 snap increment. And then I'm going to snap this thing to the floor and bring it over again and just see how many squares it takes up now. So it looks like it's closer to 4 in that direction and closer to 2 in this direction. And I think I like that a lot better. So it's almost perfectly up to the edge here and almost up to the other edge. So what I can do is I can scale it without snapping this time. And I can scale until I see it take up just about the entire 4 squares. And then in this direction, I can scale it until it's just about taking up these squares as well. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'd like it to be as close to perfect as possible. It's okay if it kind of sticks over the edge, but not by too much. because these things are going to be sitting pretty close to each other and there can be some cracks in between them. That's fine. So I'm going to turn snapping back on, and now I have a brick. Now I'm going to drag the brick down and have it sticking up just a bit like this. Now this is going to be the floor, right? So we can have these bricks sticking up just above the floor, and now I can start copying this. So with snapping on, I'm going to turn snapping back to 100 and see if I can get away with just bringing over a copy, and I'm going to inspect this crack between them, and it looks like it's probably going to work. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as they're not overlapping with each other too much, then I think that that will pretty much work. So it looks like I can copy one more over, and then I can take these three and copy them down. And if I want that sort of typical offset pattern that sometimes bricks have, I can bring it over like this. And then I can select all of these and duplicate them down again until I have enough layers to cover this piece. And now I have this repeating ground pattern. Now we can go ahead and take the super grid box and we can move it over a bit. And now we can see what the cracks look like in between these bricks. And I think that looks pretty decent. So we now have this sort of building block here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to group it. So I'm going to select all of these blocks and right click and group. So now we have one piece that we can use for the floor. So now that I have a group, all I need to do is select this and duplicate it and bring it over, and you'll see that it snaps together like a puzzle piece. And you can't really tell that it's two different pieces because we offset the bricks. So that's pretty cool. So now we have a piece for the ground. Now I'm going to leave this over here as a sort of template to choose from. And then we can just copy from it and bring the copies over into our level here. Now I'd like to rotate this by 90 degrees and just kind of bring it in here and see what it looks like on the floor. Now because we set these bricks to raise up above the floor just a bit, just by an inch or two, we can see this even with the super grid level geometry still there. Now, yes, it does stick out, and yes, there are polygons underneath, and so this is a little wasteful as far as resources goes, but for a level this small, it's not going to really matter too much. And also, if you don't have an artist that can create the assets specifically for this level for you, sometimes you have to just build using assets from asset packs like this. Okay, so we have a piece of ground, and we can actually copy this over and fill out the floor. Now, it'd be nice to be able to see between each crack so we don't see the super grid geometry pattern shining through. And we can do that by going to the World Outliner. And in the World Outliner, we can search for super, and at the top we can see this shooter prototype. And if we hit the eyeball, now we'll see the entire level minus all of the super grid geometry. So we're going to do that periodically as we're developing this level so that we can see what it looks like without that super grid showing through the cracks and things like that. All right, so we have a floor and that's looking good. In the next video, we're going to continue with using these assets to create the rest of this map. So I'll see you then.